for joining today. As mentioned, I'm Dr. Alyson Campbell. I'm here at the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Prince Edward Island. But the paper that we're discussing today was part of my doctoral work, which I completed at the University of Alberta under the supervision of Dr. Shannon Scott, and Dr. Lisa Hartling and Dr. Vicki Plord were also part of my supervisory committee. So yeah, I definitely have to start by giving them some credit as well, and giving me the opportunity to sort of pursue this work. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm told that this is a fairly informal sort of setting, so I'll just kind of go through the process of sort of how we got to this study, talk a little bit about the results of the work, and then I'll open the floor up for some conversation. So, and I apologize if I look like I'm not staring at the screen. I've got about 4 different ones going here, so just trying to navigate all of those. So first and foremost, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. So I know many of us are tuning in from across the country, and in Canada, we live, learn, and work on traditional Indigenous territories, and we pay our respects to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit ancestors, and affirm our commitment to respectful relationships with one another and this land. And here on PEI, the land in which I'm gathered today is the traditional and unceded territory of the Adequate Mi'kmaq First Nation. So I'll give you a little bit of a background primer on pediatric concussions to sort of set the context for this work. So concussions are complex traumatic brain injuries, and they impact approximately 250,000 youth in Canada, and another 750,000 in the United States will sustain a concussion every year. And there have been many Canadian organizations that have developed educational resources and supports in an effort to work towards a national standardization of concussion response and management. And there have been a lot of great strides that have been made in the area, including a living guideline for managing pediatric concussion. But there is a clear disconnect that remains between concussion knowledge and practice. And in fact, in 2017, it's a bit dated now, but there was a survey commissioned by the Public Health Agency of Canada. And that survey found that approximately 50% of Canadians had little to no knowledge about concussions and didn't know where to find information about how to prevent one. And this included physicians, coaches, teachers, athletes, as well as parents. So a wide variety of Canadians. And knowledge translation efforts, so we talk about knowledge translation as a term which really refers to bridging this know-do gap. So what do we know based on the best available research evidence? What do we know that's effective in practice? And how is it implemented, or how is it used and applied in clinical practice? And so largely these KT knowledge translation efforts, they've really focused on ensuring that healthcare professionals are able to use the latest research evidence, right, to inform their practice. But there is emerging evidence that suggests that efforts that target health consumers, so patients and families, are really important in order to inform their decision-making and also shape their treatment expectations. So the whole purpose of this research paper was to actively work with children and parents who experienced a concussion with the goal of developing, refining, and evaluating a web-based infographic for pediatric concussion. And in developing this web-based infographic, we also wanted to assess whether or not it was usable. And we also wanted to know whether it had any sort of impact on parental knowledge of pediatric concussion. So we assessed their confidence and knowledge of pediatric concussion before and after viewing the infographic. And so, as I mentioned at the start, this work is really embedded within my doctoral supervisor, Dr. Shannon Scott's research program. Her research program is called ECHO, which stands for Translating Evidence in Child Health to Enhance Outcomes. And the overarching focus of this program is really to improve health outcomes for children by developing these arts-based health resources for parents and families about many common pediatric conditions. And so this infographic here really illustrates the steps that we take in developing these resources. And I thought it was really important to provide you with these steps in relation to the paper that we're discussing today, because the steps in the process are all very similar into how we develop these tools and how we involve patients and families in the process. So right at the top of the infographic there, you'll see that there is topic identification. And the topics in which ECHO research program looks at, they're directly responsive to a national needs assessment, which was conducted by my supervisor, Dr. Scott. And this needs assessment, this was conducted in 32 emergency departments across Canada. And it consisted of surveys as well as focus groups that were administered to healthcare providers as well as families. And the purpose of this needs assessment was to identify knowledge, needs, and preferences related to child health and to identify priority conditions to look at in order to develop some of these resources. And so there were 14 priority conditions that were identified, and pediatric concussion was one of them, which was sort of, laid the foundation for pursuing this work. So you'll notice that the next step in the cycle there is parent engagement, but within the context of this project, I actually sort of flipped these two steps. So the learning from previous research and the parent engagement were kind of done in reverse. So first, I learned from previous research, and in doing that, because pediatric concussion was such a hot topic, it still is, but at the time it was really a focus for a lot of healthcare organizations, particularly related to child health. There was a really rapid increase in the number of resources that were being developed. So I really wanted to know what resources are already out there about pediatric concussion and what gaps exist in relation to these resources, because I didn't want to just reinvent the wheel and develop another resource that may not get utilized or may not be useful. So I conducted an environmental scan about resources that were developed for pediatric concussion and that were publicly available on the internet. And when I say I looked for gaps in these resources, what I did was, I had certain questions about each one. For example, what format was the tool available in? What information does it share? Who is it developed for? And then the gaps that I identified really informed the decisions that were made for the subsequent phases of this work. So the next thing I did after the environmental scan was, this was where the patient engagement piece really came in. From the environmental scan that I did, I found that there weren't a lot of pediatric concussion resources that were specifically targeted for children. So knowing that the majority of children who sustain a concussion are school-aged and older, they really want to know about their concussion. And I determined that this was a major gap, that there weren't a lot of resources specifically for children. So in order to develop a resource that was responsive to that, I interviewed children and I asked them questions about their concussion experience. I asked them what they wanted to know, how they wanted to learn about concussions, things like that. And I also interviewed their parents to gain further insight, because parents are often the primary care providers when their child is sick or is injured. And so they're often the ones who are making a lot of healthcare decisions on their behalf. So I felt it was really important to gain the parent perspective and understand the parent needs as well. So the next step in the process is the actual development of this KT tool or this resource. So I chose to develop a digital infographic because in the environmental scan, I identified that there was a gap related to resource format. And that gap was that many of the resources didn't use anything innovative or progressive, and they really didn't utilize digital technology. A lot of the resources were just PDF information sheets, point form. There was nothing really innovative about them. And to further justify this decision, parents and children that participated in the interview portion of this work, they identified a preference for seeking information online, and they wanted resources that were visually appealing, that were easy to understand, and were really brief. And so that's where the idea for the infographic came into play. And so some unique features of this infographic that I just want to highlight is there's a Hear from Peers section included in this infographic. And the Hear from Peers section is where viewers can select an audio clip of a child who has experienced a concussion, and they talk about their concussion experience as well as their recovery. And the audio clips are the actual voices of children who participated in the interviews. And the illustrations are based off personal photos that they shared. And this unique section was included after learning from children that they really prefer to learn about their concussion from someone like them who has experienced a concussion. And then there are some interactive elements of this infographic too, which make it a little bit unique. So you'll see there, there's an animated GIF, which is where you can actually see what happens to the brain when someone gets a concussion. So it illustrates the brain moving around in the skull. There are drop-down lists, there's horizontal scrolling. There's also a section where you can download a PDF handout. So you can download it and print it, or you can send it in an email if you'd like. And the reason that these info sheets were included is because parents really expressed concerns about everyone else in their child's life knowing about their child's concussion and knowing what to expect or what to do if their symptoms are, showing up or being present. And so they expressed a desire for everyone in the child's life to be on the same page in regards to their child's concussion. So these PDFs are customized. So there's one for teachers, for coaches, for family and friends, so that parents can share it with whomever is part of the child's life and should know about their concussion. There were a lot of modifications that were made to the infographic before its final sort of form. And some modifications were considered, in relation to concussion symptoms and people who are experiencing a concussion. So for example, we opted to make the font size a bit larger. The colors were softer and less bright because of the eye strain that often occurs with concussions, and things like that. So the next thing we do once the tool is sort of developed, we share it with our pediatric parent advisory group. And the pediatric parent advisory group is part of ECHO Research. And it's a group of parents, legal guardians, and grandparents from across Alberta seeking to contribute to child health research. And so the members of our pediatric parent advisory group, they serve as advisors to the ECHO Research program, and they review the resources that are developed, and they provide a lot of feedback for us. And so in addition to the PPEG, which this tool was shared with, I also shared the tool with an informal group of youth to also gain some feedback from their perspective, because this tool was also being developed for children and youth. And in addition to, the patients and families, we also share this tool with healthcare professionals and people who have expertise in concussion, just to make sure that it's in alignment with current evidence-based guidelines, and that, we're not sharing anything that's not appropriate. And so once all of the feedback is sort of gathered from the initial prototype of the tool, then we refine it based on this feedback. And so the majority of the refinements for this tool were really around clarity in language, reorganization of information, and some minor changes to graphics. So we always want to make sure that we're using inclusive language, that the images that we share are also inclusive, and we want to make sure that it's easy to understand for those who aren't healthcare professionals. And so once the tool was refined and it was sort of in its most final format, it's then time to evaluate the tool. And that's really what this paper that we're discussing today focused on. So typically when we do evaluate our tools, we would physically go to emergency departments across Alberta in rural and urban settings. And we ask participants if they would like to participate in a survey. So while they're waiting to be taken in to see a doctor, we will give them an iPad where they can view the tool, they answer the survey questions, and we do sort of in-person data collection. But because of COVID-19, we weren't able to go into the emergency department. So the survey was actually administered online. And we sent out an electronic survey. The survey was shared on social media platforms. It was shared with partner organization websites and on e-newsletters. And so any parent, caregiver, grandparent could go and complete this survey to vet the tool. And so these were the results of the usability evaluation. Pardon me. So we had 31 surveys that were completed, and the questions were derived from a previously developed questionnaire. It's called the User Experience Questionnaire. And we asked questions like, how clear were the information and images? How easy was the tool to navigate? How easy was the tool to understand, etc. And so participants provided their answers to their questions or their ratings. We rated the questions on a 10-point scale, and the average scores ranged from 8.03 to 9.26. And really what that translates to, or what that indicates, is that the usability components of the infographic were largely positive. So a lot of common comments from sort of the free text responses were parents felt the infographic was simple, it was easy to follow, it was user-friendly, and it was really concise. So we know that, aesthetically and in terms of usability, the tool it is largely rated positively. So the next thing we really wanted to look at, we wanted to know whether the tool had any sort of effect on parental knowledge, and also how confident they were in that knowledge about concussions. So to assess that, what we did is parents answered 10 questions, and these questions commonly depicted misconceptions about concussions. So they were 10 questions that are commonly misunderstood. And they answered these questions before viewing the infographic, and then they answered the same questions after viewing the infographic. And what we found is that there were no statistically significant differences in knowledge before and after viewing the infographic. So parents knowledge didn't really change too much. The infographic didn't really teach them, or they didn't really learn anything new per se. However, after looking at the infographic, parents' confidence in their knowledge significantly increased. And this is really important implications, because this suggests that our infographic then was effective in helping parents feel more confident in their knowledge about pediatric concussions. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's important. And so, like I said, what our results sort of indicated is that our infographic was effective in helping parents feel more confident in their knowledge about pediatric concussions, and increasing parental confidence in knowledge of their child's injury or illness. It can positively influence their health decision-making for their child. For example, when they should seek medical attention, whether they're caring for their child at home effectively, what recovery practices are like, and having the confidence to apply and use that knowledge is really important. And so when we talk about patient engagement, the reason I sort of gave you all of that background information as well into how the tool was really developed is to just sort of illustrate to you that patients are engaged throughout the research process, from data collection all the way through to our dissemination. So as I had mentioned, the topic, it was first identified by parents. So we asked parents across Canada what priority topics they wanted to have more information about when it came to pediatric conditions. And so we asked them, and they were engaged in that sort of priority setting from the get-go. You know, we also involve them in the tool development. So we gain their perspectives, we gain their understanding, we gain their information needs, and we ask for their feedback and their opinions before we disseminate the tool. And, you know, because we're doing this research from a nursing lens or a nursing perspective, we really recognize that patients and families provide invaluable insight into understanding healthcare experiences. They provide invaluable insight to identifying gaps in care, and, you know, coming up with solutions that really impact them the most. And that's why it's so important for us to engage patients and families throughout this entire research process. And, you know, we often use the term nothing about us without us. And that really suggests that we can't develop these resources or provide patient direct solutions without understanding the needs and the opinions of those that these resources directly impact. And so that's why we really inform all of the decision making into developing these tools with input and guidance and knowledge from our end users, which in this case were patients and families. And so the final step in the process then is dissemination. And once the tool is formally evaluated and it's deemed appropriate, we then share the tool so that it's available for patients and families to use. And so the tool is available on echokk.ca. It's also available on trekk.ca, and it's also shared throughout Echo's social media platforms. And we have a lot of partner organizations who, you know, promote Echo's research tools, as well as TREK. TREK is a national knowledge mobilization network for pediatric emergency care, and it's really reputable. It's got resources and information that are developed by pediatric professionals across the country. So it's a really reputable site. And it's really important to us that we get these tools disseminated through these reputable networks, because we also know from research that we've conducted that that's something that parents and families really value is that their information is coming from reliable sources. And that's often what they're looking for when they're looking for patient resources, is they're looking for hospitals, or they're looking for organizations that they feel they can trust. And I just want to take a minute to acknowledge all the funding partners who supported this work. And that's really all I have for you today. And I'm really happy to take any questions at this time, or